Why didn't you just say so? Presented by Still a Frog.
They didn't live around the corner from each other. Now, some people might find that appealing for obvious reasons, but given how astonishingly comfortable, intimate, really, their conversations had been, it was disheartening. Because starting with the first line of his first email, she'd seen in him a level of intelligence that's rare, especially on the internet, where one-syllable words forming two-word sentences that took 3 seconds to read were supposed to pass for romance. You know, brilliant lines like, "Hey there." Maybe it was because he was a decade older, but she suspected the connection went deeper because he always seemed to sense even her most guarded emotions. So, no matter the mood, intense or lighthearted, whatever little thing he said always felt right. Sometimes it was like fulfillment or completeness, and a part of her heart she'd forgotten was there, and other times she'd burst out laughing hysterically. But he always gave her exactly what she needed, from deep contentment to soaring flights of spiritual euphoria, all the way to hilarious, completely out-of-the-blue comments about the most ordinary things. He'd felt it too, from the very start, something powerful drawing him to this woman who not only seemed to embody the best of 21st century America, but who also radiated the mystique of a time long past, free spirit, and strong, independent mind, but wonderfully feminine. She charmed him from her first email, and when he heard her soft, lilting inflection with a hint of Southern, unintentionally flirtatious, well, she had him from hello. And so, after what seemed like an interminable wait, but was in reality less than 2 weeks, he found himself driving to meet a woman who'd already captivated him completely, despite the fact that he hadn't even seen her yet, at least not in person. He was almost half an hour early when he got to the place. No way he was going to disappoint her by arriving late. He'd have camped out under the little shelter at the city bus stop across the street if he'd had to. But almost immediately, he thought he saw her. He tried to get a glimpse of her face, but she was angled away from him. And just when he realized that he'd been staring, mesmerized, his phone buzzed. Her text said, "I got here a little early. I'm at the bar, red dress, a little nervous, ha. Please text when you're walking in." His anticipation was palpable, but he waited until she'd had a sip of wine. Then he texted her. He saw her phone light up, and he walked over. She took a deep breath, steadied herself, and then smiled as she turned to him. He spoke first. "I had something I wanted to say when I met you, but now words are—" "I understand," she said, "and I know." It was ironic, poetic even. The force that had drawn them to this point had been limited to words, what they wrote and spoke, like electricity restricted to a wire or water contained by a pipe. But from the moment their eyes met, not using words, silence felt deeply affectionate instead of uncomfortably awkward, because the feeling had somehow escaped the confines of conversation and now enveloped them. It was the difference between fleeting little bursts of sudden happiness from calls and texts versus being together under a blanket on a chilly, windswept, deserted beach late at night, listening to the pounding waves and looking up at the stars. She pulled him gently into an embrace, which he returned with an emotional intensity that stunned him. There's something so wondrous when two people who thought they were strangers meet for the first time and suddenly realize that they're not strangers at all. They just hadn't met yet. And this was one of those rare moments. The evening was magical, but what came after is where our story lies. He texted her that he'd enjoyed her company far more than he dared to hope. The message was just a few words, but once again they felt right. She knew it was real for her, that thing that was celebrated by minstrels and poets in song and verse, but that she'd never had. And she honestly thought he too was smitten. But then, as the clock ticked slowly long past midnight, he came to her bed. No, not the man she'd just met. It was instead that faceless, formless figment of her imagination that she'd known forever, the voice of eternal doubt. "But aren't there things that seem too good to be true that really are true?" she asked plaintively. "Well, of course," said the voice. just not for you. She knew this was a defining moment, so by mid-morning she decided to take the chance. She emailed. She tried to explain how happy she was that they'd met and how indescribably right it had felt to be with him. She just wanted to know one thing. She'd been asked out by other men. How would he feel about her accepting? What she left out of her message was that she did not want to accept. She wanted to see only him, but she wanted to know that he didn't want her going out. And, by the way, that he wasn't going to date other women. When he got the message, it was like a warning klaxon in a nuclear power plant went off in his head. Danger, danger, danger. He desperately wished he had a female reference manual, or at least a girl-speak pocket translator. Was there a section on questions with no good answers? Probably not. That would make far too much sense. And that one section would be endless. His instinct was that she did not want him to go out with other women, and this was her way of asking if he was going to, which made no sense to him because he thought it may as well have been tattooed across his forehead that he wanted to see only her, but still his heart sank. Well, actually, it plummeted. He phrased his answer carefully. He wrote that he not only would be okay with it, he would encourage her to do it, because he wanted her to be sure, since he had already made up his mind. Problem was, she never read that far. She was already on edge, so she barely made it past him being okay with it, and the word encourage might as well have been a concrete wall. He was encouraging her to date other men? What the hell was wrong with him? Hadn't he been taken with her, or was that just some role he played? She grabbed her phone and began to type furiously. What first came to mind was a torrent of colorful language. What she sent, however, was just 14 words. That's not the answer I expected, but oh well. It was a nice dinner. Before she could put the phone down, it rang. He asked if she'd actually read his message. I think my text might indicate that I did, she replied, including the part about me wanting you to be sure because I've already made up my mind, but I don't want to push. I didn't get that far. That far? It was 2 lines into an 8-line text. I don't want you going out with other men. I don't want to see other women, and I don't even need a second date with you to be sure. I already know what I want. There was silence. He could almost hear her smile. Well, why didn't you just say so? She practically shouted. You mean like you did? He shot back. Ha ha ha, she said. I'll call you when I leave work, okay, smartass? He turned back to the woman behind the counter. She was older, well-dressed, attractive, exactly what you'd expect at an upscale jewelry store. She'd heard the phone conversation, and she was peering at him intently over the tops of her reading glasses. So, you're buying her a ring less than 12 hours after your first date? Yes, he replied. Forgive me for saying it, but that's totally insane and wildly romantic. I have to post it on Facebook, and I'd like to use it in one of our ads, anonymously, of course, if you wouldn't mind. I'm sorry, he laughed, but not even you were supposed to know I'd only been out with her the one time, so I certainly don't want anyone else to find out. What about just the girls I work with? Can I tell just them? She almost pleaded. No, he said. Each one of them has at least one best friend she can share anything with, and that's how in 15 minutes every woman in the world knows that some fool bought a girl a ring after their first date. How about after you get married? Can I tell everyone then? You mean if we get married, he said. Why wouldn't you? She asked. Would you marry a guy who bought you a ring after one 2-hour date during which you both kept on all your clothes? Good question, she said. Good question indeed, he replied, smiling as she handed him back his credit card, and then he pocketed the small box, waved goodbye, and headed for the door.